When I found a box of letters in my late husband's study addressed to my real wife, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I thought he'd been living a lie our entire marriage, until I read the final page and discovered the devastating truth. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Ann Whitmore, and I'm 68 years old. For 43 years, more than half my lifetime, I was Richard's wife. Not just his wife on paper, but his partner in every sense of the word. I was his caregiver when he was sick, his cheerleader when he doubted himself, his confidant when the weight of the world felt too heavy. I was the mother of his 2 children, Jennifer and Michael, and the grandmother to 5 beautiful grandchildren who called me Nana and filled my kitchen with laughter every Sunday afternoon. I gave up everything for the life we built together. At 23, I was a promising young teacher with dreams of becoming a principal someday. I loved working with children, watching their faces light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. But when Richard got accepted to medical school 3 states away, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my entire life, left my teaching position, and followed him to Connecticut. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd find another teaching job once we settled in. But then came the long hours of medical school, the exhausting residency shifts, the pressure of building his practice. Richard needed me. Our children needed me. So I stayed home, and my dreams quietly gathered dust in the back of my mind. Everyone in our small Connecticut town knew us as the perfect couple. We were the Whitmores, respectable, stable, enviable. Richard was the dedicated surgeon who saved lives, and I was the devoted wife who held everything together behind the scenes. Every Sunday morning, I'd bake 3 dozen chocolate chip cookies for the church fundraiser, my grandmother's recipe that everyone loved. I'd arrange them on my best china plates, wrap them in plastic wrap tied with ribbons, and smile as people told me how lucky Richard was to have me. On Tuesday afternoons, I volunteered at the hospital where Richard worked, pushing the book cart through the corridors, reading to patients who had no visitors. The nurses all knew me by name. They'd say things like, "Dr. Whitmore is so blessed to have you, Margaret. You're an angel." And I'd blush and wave away the compliments because that's what good wives did. We made ourselves small so our husbands could shine brighter. I never missed a single one of my grandchildren's soccer games, even the ones that rained or ran late into the evening. I'd sit in the cold bleachers with my thermos of hot chocolate, cheering louder than anyone else, taking pictures to add to the albums I meticulously maintained. I was the grandmother who remembered every birthday, every favorite snack, every silly nickname. I was the one they called when they were sad or scared or just needed someone to listen. I wasn't just a wife and mother, I was the heart of our family. I was the glue that held everyone together, the safe place everyone returned to, the constant in a changing world. I prided myself on being selfless, on putting everyone's needs before my own. It gave me purpose, made me feel valuable. Looking back now, standing in the ruins of everything I believed, maybe I was too selfless. Maybe I gave so much of myself away that I forgot to keep anything for me. Maybe I was so busy being the perfect wife that I never stopped to ask the most important question. Was the man I was performing for even watching? 3 months after Richard passed from a sudden heart attack, I was still living in the fog of grief. Time had become strange and liquid, days blending into one another without shape or meaning. I'd wake up in the morning and forget for just a moment that he was gone. Then the reality would crash over me like a wave, stealing my breath all over again. Our Victorian home felt too big now, too quiet. The silence pressed against my ears until they rang. I found myself turning on the television just to hear voices, even though I couldn't focus on what anyone was saying. The house had always been filled with sound. Richard's footsteps on the stairs, his voice calling for me from his study, the rustle of newspaper at the breakfast table. Now there was nothing but the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of old floorboards settling. Every morning, Muscle memory betrayed me. I'd stand at the coffee maker and prepare 2 cups without thinking, only realizing my mistake when I turned around and saw the empty chair at the kitchen table. The first time it happened, I'd stood there crying, holding both mugs, feeling ridiculous and heartbroken. Now I just poured the second cup down the sink and pretended it didn't hurt. I kept Richard everywhere. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, folded carefully on top of the thriller novel he'd never finish. His slippers remained by the bed, positioned as if he'd just stepped out of them. His favorite cardigan, the navy one with the worn elbows that I'd offered to replace a dozen times, still draped over his desk chair. Some mornings I'd press my face into the fabric, desperately searching for his scent, but it was fading. Everything was fading. In the garden, I maintained his tomato plants with religious devotion. Richard had been so proud of those plants, spending his rare free Sunday mornings carefully pruning and staking them. I didn't have his green thumb, but I watered them faithfully, talked to them the way he used to, and felt a small victory every time I spotted a new tomato forming. It felt like keeping a piece of him alive. His study remained completely untouched, a shrine to the life he'd lived. His medical journals sat in neat stacks on the desk, organized by date the way he'd always insisted. His diplomas hung on the wall: Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, 20 years of excellence awards from the hospital. His coffee mug, the one that said, "World's Best Dad," that the kids had given him 15 years ago, still held 3 pens and a highlighter. The faint smell of his cologne lingered in the air, mixing with the leather scent of his medical bag that hung on the coat rack. Our daughter Jennifer kept gently pushing me to go through his things. "Mom, it's been 3 months," she'd say, her voice patient but firm. "You need to start sorting through Dad's papers. The estate lawyer needs documentation. We have to file taxes. You can't just leave everything frozen in time." But I wasn't ready. Opening that study door felt like admitting he was really gone, like dismantling the last physical evidence of our life together. So I kept finding excuses, kept delaying, kept pretending that if I just left everything untouched, maybe somehow he'd walk back through that door. Life moved forward around me in mechanical patterns. On Tuesdays, I still played bridge with the ladies from church, Eleanor, Patricia, and Diane. They'd pat my hand sympathetically and tell me how strong I was being, how proud Richard would be of how well I was holding up. I'd smile and bid my cards and pretend I wasn't completely numb inside. On Thursdays, I babysat my grandchildren. I'd make them grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, help with homework, and listen to their stories about school. They were careful around me now, their usual wild energy dampened by confusion and concern. 7-year-old Emma had asked me once, "Nana, are you sad all the time now?" I'd hugged her and lied, saying I was fine, that Grandpa would want us to be happy. The truth was, I existed in a strange in-between space, not quite living, but going through all the motions of life. My heart stayed frozen in the past, wrapped around the memory of the man I thought I knew completely. I clung to every photograph, every memory, every shared moment like they were life rafts, keeping me from drowning. I told myself that this was grief, that this was normal, that eventually the fog would lift and I'd find my way back to myself. I had no idea that everything I was mourning, the perfect marriage, the devoted husband, the beautiful life we'd built together, was about to be revealed as nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. It was a Saturday morning in late September when I finally gathered the courage to enter Richard's study. The air had turned crisp with the first hints of autumn, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles floating lazily in the air. Jennifer was coming over at noon to help me sort through paperwork for the estate lawyer, and I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, my hand resting on the doorknob, trying to steady my breathing. It felt like crossing a threshold into sacred ground, like I was violating something by being there without him. But I forced myself forward one step at a time until I was standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by his things. Everything looked exactly as he'd left it that Tuesday morning when he'd kissed my cheek and headed to the hospital for what would be his last surgery. His desk calendar still showed that day's appointments. His coffee mug still sat on the desk, a ring of dried coffee staining the bottom. I picked up his cardigan from the chair and held it to my face, breathing in deeply, but his scent had almost completely faded now. I decided to start simple, dusting the bookshelves. It was something mindless, something that wouldn't require me to make any decisions about what to keep or throw away. I grabbed a cloth from the kitchen and began working my way along the shelves, wiping down the spines of medical textbooks and journals he'd collected over decades. The top shelf was the hardest to reach. I had to stand on my tiptoes, stretching my arm as far as it would go. As I pulled out a heavy medical encyclopedia to dust behind it, something shifted. I felt the weight of something substantial sliding forward, and before I could react, a leather-bound box tumbled from its hiding place behind the books. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack that made me jump. The brass lock, probably weakened by age, broke on impact, and the lid popped open. Dozens of envelopes spilled across the floor like fallen leaves, scattering in every direction. My heart was pounding from the sudden noise and movement. I knelt down slowly, my knees protesting, and began gathering the letters. They were old, the paper yellowed with age, the edges soft from years of handling. Some were in envelopes, others folded but never sealed. Richard's handwriting covered every page in his distinctive doctor's scrawl. I picked up one of the envelopes, turning it over in my trembling hands. That's when I saw it. Written across the front in Richard's careful script, "To my real wife." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at them, reading them over and over, convinced I must be misunderstanding. Real wife? What did that mean? I looked at another envelope. Same words, and another. To my real wife. To my real wife. To my real wife. My breath caught in my throat. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the letters. The room seemed to tilt around me, and I had to sit down on the floor before my legs gave out completely. Real wife. The phrase echoed in my mind, each repetition feeling like a knife twisting deeper. If there was a real wife, then what was I? The fake one? The substitute? Had Richard been living a double life all these years? Was there another woman somewhere? Someone he wrote love letters to while I cooked his dinners and washed his clothes and raised his children? My mind raced through 43 years of marriage at lightning speed, frantically searching for signs I'd missed. Had there been unexplained absences? Strange phone calls? Mysterious expenses? Late nights at the hospital that weren't really at the hospital at all? I thought about the medical conferences he'd attended alone, the weekend seminars, the times he'd said he needed space to think. Had he been with her during those times? I looked around the study with new eyes, suddenly suspicious of everything. What else had Richard hidden from me? What other secrets were tucked away in drawers and behind books, waiting to destroy what was left of my memories? The sound of Jennifer's car pulling into the driveway jolted me back to reality. I panicked, quickly gathering all the letters and shoving them back into the box. My hands fumbled with the broken clasp as I heard her car door slam. I couldn't let her see these. Not yet. Not until I knew what they meant. I shoved the box under Richard's desk and stood up, smoothing my hair and trying to compose my face into something that resembled normalcy. But inside, my mind was screaming a single question over and over. Who was Richard's real wife? And if it wasn't me, then who had I been for the past 43 years? For 3 days, that leather box sat on my nightstand like a ticking time bomb, and I couldn't bring myself to open it. Every time I walked into the bedroom, my eyes would drift to it involuntarily, my stomach clenching with anxiety. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at it in the darkness, the outline barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the curtains, and tell myself I'd open it tomorrow, but tomorrow would come, and I'd find another excuse. I became an expert at rationalization, at talking myself out of the truth that was sitting 3 feet from my pillow. These letters were probably old love letters from before we met, I told myself. Richard had girlfriends in college, after all. Maybe he'd kept them for sentimental reasons, and the real wife phrase was just something sweet he'd called a college sweetheart. That made sense, didn't it? Or maybe they were from his mother. Richard's mother had passed away when he was in medical school, and he'd been devastated. Perhaps these were letters she'd written to him, and real wife was some kind of inside joke or a term of endearment they'd had. Family dynamics could be strange that way. Yes, that had to be it. On the second night, lying awake at 2 in the morning, I convinced myself they might be creative writing from his college days. Richard had taken a poetry class before switching to pre-med. Maybe these were fictional letters, writing exercises, practice for a class assignment he'd kept for nostalgia. The fact that they were hidden didn't mean anything. Lots of people were embarrassed by their youthful, creative attempts. Every time I reached for the box, my hand would hover over it for a moment before pulling back. My heart would start racing. My palms would get sweaty. And a voice in my head would whisper, "Once you open this, you can't unknow what's inside. Once you read these letters, your memory of Richard might be destroyed forever." Was I really ready for that? I told myself I was protecting his memory, honoring the man he'd been. Richard had been a good husband, hadn't he? He'd provided for us, given us a beautiful home, put our children through college. He'd never raised his hand to me, never yelled, never been cruel. He'd kiss me goodbye every morning and come home every night. That had to count for something. I was protecting our marriage, too, I reasoned. We built a life together, raised a family, created decades of memories. Whatever was in those letters couldn't erase the good times we'd had, the vacations, the holidays, the quiet evenings reading side by side on the couch. Why should I let some old letters taint all of that? But if I was being really honest with myself, in those dark hours when sleep wouldn't come, I knew I was just afraid. Terrified, actually. Afraid that opening those letters would destroy everything I believed about the man I'd spent my entire adult life loving. Afraid that I'd discover our marriage had been a lie. Afraid that I'd been a fool. Deep down, some part of me already knew the truth. You don't hide letters addressed to my real wife behind encyclopedias in your study if they're innocent. You don't keep them in a locked box if there's nothing to hide. But acknowledging that truth meant acknowledging that my entire life might have been built on deception, and I wasn't ready for that kind of pain. So I kept the box closed and kept telling myself comfortable lies. I went through my days in a fog even thicker than the grief I'd been living in. I baked cookies for the church fundraiser on Sunday, my hands moving through the familiar motions while my mind screamed questions I wasn't ready to answer. I had coffee with Eleanor and Patricia on Tuesday, nodding and smiling while they talked about their families, all while thinking about that box waiting for me at home. At night, I'd lie in our bed, the bed Richard and I had shared for 4 decades, staring at the ceiling. I'd replay our marriage like a movie in my mind, examining every scene for cracks in the foundation I'd thought was solid. The way he'd sometimes seem distant during dinner, his mind somewhere else. The times he'd pull away when I tried to hold his hand, the birthdays when his gifts felt impersonal, like he'd asked his secretary to pick something up. The anniversary dinners where conversation felt forced, like we were strangers making small talk. Had the signs been there all along? Had I been so busy playing the role of the perfect wife that I'd never noticed my husband had stopped playing the role of the devoted husband? Or worse, had he ever been playing that role at all? On the 4th morning, I woke up and realized I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. The not knowing was eating me alive, consuming me from the inside out. Whatever was in those letters, it couldn't be worse than the torture of my own imagination. At least the truth, no matter how painful, would be real. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did, and sat on our bed with the box in my lap. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. The letters stared up at me, dozens of them, Richard's handwriting covering page after page. It was time to meet my husband's real wife and to discover what that made me. On the fourth night, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. The weight of not knowing had become heavier than any truth could possibly be. I went downstairs to the kitchen, poured myself a generous glass of Chardonnay, something I rarely did, maybe once or twice a year at holidays, and carried it back upstairs with shaking hands. Some part of me knew I'd need the courage that only wine could provide. I sat on our bed, the same bed where Richard and I had slept side by side for 43 years, and placed the leather box in my lap. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my finger tracing the broken brass clasp. This was it, the moment of truth. Whatever I found inside these letters would change everything, and there would be no going back. I took a long sip of wine, set the glass on the nightstand, and opened the box with trembling fingers. The letters were arranged chronologically, I realized, with the oldest ones on the bottom. I decided to start from the beginning to understand this story from its inception. I pulled out the first envelope, noting the date written in the corner, September 15th, 20 years ago. 20 years. I tried to remember what we'd been doing then. Jennifer had just started college. Michael was finishing high school. We'd been planning his graduation party. It had been an ordinary time, or so I'd thought. My hands trembled so badly I could barely unfold the letter. The paper crinkled softly in the quiet bedroom. I smoothed it out on my lap and began to read. "My dearest real wife," it began, and my stomach immediately clenched. "Today, I watched you across the breakfast table and I felt nothing, absolutely nothing." I had to stop reading, my vision blurred with tears. I blinked them back furiously, forcing myself to continue. "You were talking about the church bake sale, going on and on about whether to make chocolate chip cookies or oatmeal raisin this year, and all I could think about was how much I wished I were somewhere else. Anywhere else. With someone else. Anyone else." The words felt like physical blows, each sentence landing harder than the last. I remembered that morning. I remembered that exact conversation. I'd been so excited about the bake sale, about trying a new recipe I'd found in a magazine. Richard had nodded along, and I'd thought he was listening, thought he cared about the small details of my life. "You've become a stranger to me," the letter continued. "A kind, efficient stranger who keeps my house clean and raises my children, but not the woman I married. She's gone. Or maybe she never existed in the first place. Maybe I invented her, projected onto you what I wanted to see rather than what was really there." My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs. I couldn't breathe properly. I had to read the paragraph 3 times before the words truly sank in, before I could process what Richard was actually saying. This wasn't a love letter to another woman. This was a hate letter about me. The date, 20 years ago, that was right after I'd gained 30 pounds following my hysterectomy. The surgery had thrown my hormones into chaos, and despite my best efforts, the weight had accumulated around my middle and refused to leave. That was also right after I'd stopped dyeing my gray hair, deciding to age naturally because Richard had always said he loved me just as I was. That was right after I'd fully embraced being a grandmother, when I'd stopped worrying about my appearance and started focusing on what I thought really mattered: family, love, connection. He'd written this letter while I was downstairs making his favorite pot roast for dinner, while I was folding his laundry, carefully pairing his socks the way he liked, while I was living my life believing we were happy, believing we were partners, believing he loved me. I felt physically sick. The wine churned in my empty stomach, threatening to come back up. But I couldn't stop. I reached for another letter, then another. Each one was dated. Each one marked another day in our marriage where Richard had smiled at me, kissed my cheek, and then retreated to his study to write about how much he resented me. "She never challenges me anymore," one letter read. She just agrees with everything I say, like she has no thoughts of her own. I dread coming home, said another. The moment I pull into the driveway, I feel this heaviness settle over me. She's let herself go completely. I see other men at the hospital with attractive wives who take care of themselves, and I feel embarrassed. Each letter revealed another layer of contempt, another dimension of disappointment, another way I'd apparently failed him without ever knowing I was being judged. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the pages, smudging his careful handwriting. This was the man who'd held me during my father's funeral, the man who'd celebrated 25 anniversaries with me, the man whose children I'd raised, whose home I'd maintained, whose life I'd built mine around. And all along, secretly, he'd despised me. I looked around our bedroom with new eyes. The floral wallpaper I'd chosen that he'd said he loved, the photographs on the dresser of our family vacations, the quilt my mother had made us as a wedding gift. Everything felt contaminated now, tainted by this hidden truth. I reached for my wine glass with a shaking hand and drained it in one long swallow. The alcohol burned going down, but it was nothing compared to the fire burning in my chest, a mix of heartbreak, humiliation, and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to rage. But I wasn't done reading yet. There were dozens more letters in that box, years of Richard's secret thoughts. And I needed to know it all. Every horrible detail. Because somewhere in these pages was the truth about my marriage, about my life, about who I'd really been to the man I'd loved with every fiber of my being. I reached for the next letter, steeling myself for whatever poison it contained. Letter after letter revealed a man I didn't recognize, a stranger wearing my husband's face. I read through the night, unable to stop even as my tears made it difficult to see the words. Each letter was a fresh wound, cutting deeper than the last. He wrote about how trapped he felt in our marriage, how my presence suffocated him. Coming home feels like putting on a straitjacket, one letter said. The moment I walk through the door, I have to become this version of myself that doesn't exist anymore. The loving husband, the family man, it's exhausting. Another described how my constant cheerfulness grated on his nerves. She's always so damn happy, he'd written, always smiling, always positive, always making the best of everything. Doesn't she realize how annoying that is? Doesn't she see how fake it makes her seem? Sometimes I want to shake her and ask if she's even a real person or just some wind-up doll programmed to be pleasant. He resented everything about me. My weight, my gray hair, the way I laughed too loud at church, how I talked about the grandchildren constantly, my provincial taste in movies and books, the fact that I'd never finished my degree, my cooking, which he called repetitive and uninspired, even my kindness, which he interpreted as weakness. She never challenges me, one letter read, the words sharp with contempt. She agrees with everything I say, supports every decision I make, never pushes back even when I'm clearly wrong. I don't have a wife. I have a servant who happens to share my bed. She's erased her own personality so completely that there's nothing left to respect, let alone love. Another described how he'd started eating lunch alone at the hospital specifically to avoid colleagues asking about me. I can't stand the way they talk about her, he wrote. How sweet she is, how devoted, how I'm such a lucky man. If they only knew the truth, that I stay in this marriage out of obligation, not love, that every day feels like serving a life sentence. He wrote about inventing late-night emergencies just to have an excuse to leave the house, about taking the long route home to delay seeing me by even 15 minutes, about fantasizing during family dinners about what his life would be like if he'd married someone else, someone sophisticated, someone who'd maintained her figure, someone who challenged him intellectually instead of just nodding along like a bobblehead. But the letter that shattered me completely was dated just 6 months before he died. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the paper. I'm counting down the days until retirement, it began. Just 3 more years, and I can finally leave. I've already looked at apartments in Sarasota, small, modern places near the beach. Nothing like this old Victorian prison. I'll tell her I need space for my health, that the Florida climate would be better for me. She'll understand. She always understands, always sacrifices, always puts me first. That's the problem. She's erased herself so completely to accommodate me that there's nothing left to love. She's become invisible, and I resent her for it. I dropped the letter like it had burned my fingers. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made me human. For 43 years, I'd been in love with a ghost, a version of Richard that only existed in my imagination. The real Richard had stopped loving me decades ago and had been too much of a coward to tell me the truth. But then, at the very bottom of the box, beneath all the letters, I found something that turned my heartbreak into something far more sinister. Financial documents. Bank statements from an account I'd never seen before. My hands were still shaking from the letters, but now a different kind of tremor ran through me. The cold recognition that this went deeper than I'd imagined. I spread the papers across the bed, my grief momentarily suspended by shock. There was an apartment lease in Sarasota, Florida, signed 2 years before Richard's death. The monthly rent was $2,800. I tried to remember if we'd ever discussed Florida real estate, any investment properties. Nothing. He'd signed this lease and never mentioned it once. Then came the life insurance policies, 3 of them. I was listed as beneficiary on the small one, $50,000, barely enough to cover funeral expenses. But the others, totaling $750,000, listed Jennifer as the primary beneficiary. Attached was a handwritten note in Richard's scrawl. Don't let your mother waste this on her church projects or donate it to some charity. This is for you and Michael's future. My breath caught. He'd planned this. Planned to leave me with almost nothing. I found real estate documents next, and my blood ran cold. Our house, the Victorian home I decorated, maintained, and loved for 40 years, had been quietly transferred into Jennifer's name 6 months before Richard died. The same with our lake cabin in Vermont. Both properties were no longer mine, and I'd never signed a single paper. There were investment portfolios I knew nothing about, stocks, bonds, retirement accounts, all totaling over $1.2 million, all transferred to Michael's name, years of investments built with money from Richard's practice, money I'd assumed was ours, now legally belonging to our son. Then I found the lawyer consultations, pages of notes from 3 different attorneys discussing divorce strategy, how to minimize wife's claim to assets, protecting wealth accumulated during marriage, strategies for equitable distribution in spouse's favor. The dates spanned the last 5 years of Richard's life. He'd been planning this systematically, methodically, consulting professionals on how to leave me destitute. But the worst discovery came in a manila folder marked Family Meeting Notes. Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, between Richard, Jennifer, and Michael. The subject lines made my stomach turn. The plan, handling mom. Asset protection strategy. I clicked on my reading lamp and read the first email, dated 3 years ago. Dad's right, Jennifer had written. Mom has no idea how to manage money. If something happens to you, she'll either give it all away to the church or get scammed by some charity. We need to protect the family assets. Michael and I agree this is the responsible thing to do. Michael's response, I'm on board. Mom's always been naive about finances. Better we handle this now than deal with the mess later. When do we move forward? Richard's reply, good. I'll start the transfers next month. Your mother doesn't review the financial statements, so she won't notice. By the time I'm gone, everything will be secure. My own children, my babies, whom I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, whom I'd driven to soccer practice and music lessons, whom I'd loved with every cell of my body. They'd conspired with their father to steal everything from me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a calculated plan to destroy me financially while I grieved, leaving me dependent on their charity, powerless and broken. I sat surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that had been happening right under my nose. While I'd been baking cookies and babysitting grandchildren, my husband and children had been in secret meetings, signing documents, transferring assets, plotting my financial ruin. And the most chilling part? They'd done it all with smiles on their faces, kissing my cheek, telling me they loved me, all while systematically dismantling any security I had. I couldn't breathe. The air in the bedroom felt too thick, suffocating. My chest tightened until I thought my ribs might crack from the pressure. The papers slipped from my trembling hands and scattered across the comforter like evidence at a crime scene, which I realized with dawning horror was exactly what they were. I collapsed onto the floor, my legs simply giving out beneath me. The impact jarred my knees, but I barely felt it. I clutched the documents to my chest, crumpling them against my heart as if I could somehow absorb the truth through my skin, make it less real. Sobs tore through me so violently that my whole body shook. I couldn't catch my breath between them, gasping and choking on my own grief. Everything I'd believed about my life was a lie. Not just a small lie, not just a hidden affair or a secret I could rationalize. Everything. My entire existence for 43 years had been built on sand, and now the tide had come in and washed it all away, leaving me with nothing but the wreckage. Richard hadn't been the devoted husband everyone praised at his funeral. He'd been an actor playing a role, counting down the days until he could escape. And I'd been too blind, too trusting, too pathetically grateful for his presence to see the truth. I'd mistaken his tolerance for love, his obligation for commitment, his contempt for companionship. But Richard's betrayal, as devastating as it was, wasn't even the deepest cut. My children, Jennifer and Michael, my babies, had betrayed me too. They'd sat at my dining room table, eating meals I'd cooked, accepting my love and care, all while actively participating in a plan to destroy me financially. They'd stood at their father's funeral with tears in their eyes, leaning on me for comfort, accepting condolences about what a wonderful man Dad was, knowing they were about to rob me of everything we'd built together. I thought about Jennifer as a little girl, crying in my arms after falling off her bike. I'd cleaned her scraped knees, kissed her forehead, told her everything would be okay. I thought about Michael at 8 years old, terrified of the dark, and how I'd spent weeks sleeping on his bedroom floor until he felt safe again. I'd sacrifice sleep, sacrifice my own comfort because that's what mothers do. That's what love is. Or so I'd thought. Sitting there on the floor, surrounded by letters and lies, I felt like I was drowning in 43 years of wasted love. Every birthday cake I'd baked from scratch, every school play I'd attended, every soccer game, every piano recital, every parent-teacher conference, every sleepless night I'd spent nursing sick children, every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd postponed, every piece of myself I'd given away, all of it had been for people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been so busy being the perfect wife and mother that I'd never noticed I was living with strangers. People who smiled to my face while sharpening knives behind my back. I curled into a ball on the floor, my arms wrapped around my knees, and wept until I had nothing left inside. My throat was raw, my eyes swollen, my chest aching. The bedroom, our bedroom, though it had never really been ours, had it? Felt like a tomb. A monument to a marriage that had died years ago, even though I'd been too foolish to notice. Hours passed. The sun rose outside the window, painting the room in pale morning light, but I couldn't move. I lay there among the scattered evidence of my destroyed life, feeling something inside me fundamentally break. Not just my heart, that had shattered the moment I read the first letter. This was deeper. This was the death of the woman I'd been, the Margaret who'd believed in love and family and the goodness of people. That Margaret was gone, and I didn't know who would rise from her ashes. I don't know how long I lay there on that floor. Time had stopped meaning anything. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the bedroom, then began its descent again. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Probably Jennifer checking in, playing the role of concerned daughter while waiting for me to sign away what little Richard had left me. But eventually, the tears stopped. Not because the pain had lessened, but because I'd simply run out of them. I felt emptied out, hollowed, like a shell washed up on a beach. And in that emptiness, something unexpected began to grow. Something harder than grief, something sharper than heartbreak. Anger. It started as a small spark deep in my chest, then spread like wildfire through my veins. How dare they? How dare Richard write those poisonous letters while I sacrificed everything for him? How dare Jennifer and Michael plot against me while accepting my love, my time, my endless devotion? How dare they all assume I was too stupid, too weak, too naive to ever discover the truth? I pushed myself up from the floor, my muscles stiff and aching from hours of lying motionless. I walked to the bathroom on unsteady legs and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was almost unrecognizable. My eyes were swollen and red, my face blotchy from crying, my gray hair a wild mess around my shoulders. But there was something different in my expression now, something that hadn't been there before. I wasn't just Margaret the devoted wife anymore. I wasn't just Margaret the selfless mother. I was Margaret, the woman who'd been betrayed by everyone she loved, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Richard might be dead, but his conspiracy was very much alive. Jennifer and Michael thought they'd won. They thought I'd just accept my fate, maybe cry a little, but ultimately roll over and let them take everything. They'd underestimated me for so long that they couldn't imagine I might fight back. That was their mistake. I washed my face with cold water, tied my hair back, and returned to the bedroom with new purpose. I gathered every single letter, every document, every piece of evidence, and spread them across the bed in organized piles. Then I pulled out my phone, the one Jennifer had bought me last year, teaching me how to use the camera, and I photographed everything, every page, every email, every bank statement. I created a digital record that couldn't be destroyed or hidden. Then I made a list in my neat teacher's handwriting, the same careful script I'd used decades ago when planning lessons. But instead of vocabulary words and math problems, I was planning something else entirely: justice. I needed a lawyer, not Mr. Peterson, the family attorney who'd been Richard's friend for 20 years. Someone sharp, someone ruthless, someone who wouldn't be swayed by my children's tears or their father's reputation. I needed copies of every financial record I could find in this house. And most importantly, I needed to stay quiet. If Jennifer and Michael suspected I knew anything, they'd move faster to protect themselves, maybe accelerate whatever timeline they had. So I'd play the role they expected: the grieving widow, the confused mother who didn't understand finances, the sweet, naive woman who'd never suspect her own family of betrayal. But behind that mask, I'd be preparing for war. For 43 years, I'd been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as the simple wife who didn't ask questions and didn't make waves. Everyone had assumed that because I was kind, I was weak. Because I was selfless, I was stupid. Because I smiled and baked cookies and never complained, I had no backbone. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I looked at my reflection one more time, and this time I barely recognized the woman staring back, but in a good way. My eyes were still red, but they were clear now, focused, determined. "Margaret," I whispered to my reflection, "it's time to stop being a victim." I picked up my phone and started searching for the one person who might help me: Sarah Bennett, my college roommate who'd become one of Boston's most feared divorce attorneys. We'd lost touch over the years, probably because Richard had subtly discouraged the friendship, I realized now. But I still had her number saved. My finger hovered over the call button for just a moment. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. This would be war, and wars destroyed families. But then I looked at the letters spread across my bed, at the evidence of how my family had already been destroyed from the inside, and I pressed dial. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I called Sarah. My hands shook as I dialed, but my voice was steady when she answered. I told her everything, every letter, every document, every email between Richard and our children. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Margaret," Sarah finally said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This is estate fraud and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. We're going to destroy them." Within 2 hours, she'd connected me with Daniel Rothstein, a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden assets, and Patricia Chen, an estate attorney known for her ruthless efficiency in cases like mine. They took my case immediately, working on contingency because, as Patricia said coldly, "When we're done, there will be more than enough to pay our fees." For the next 6 weeks, I became an actress in my own life, playing the role of the clueless, grieving widow while secretly building a case that would blow my family's conspiracy apart. It was the performance of a lifetime. Every Sunday, I had dinner with Jennifer and Michael, smiling as they talked about their father like he was a saint. "Remember how Dad used to make pancakes on Saturday mornings?" Jennifer would say, her eyes misty. I'd nod and smile, fighting the urge to scream that their saint had been planning to abandon me. Michael would reminisce about fishing trips with his father, and I'd add my own memories, all while a recording device in my pocket captured every lie. I babysat the grandchildren without complaint, baked my famous apple pie for church fundraisers, attended my Tuesday bridge games like clockwork. Everyone commented on how well I was holding up, how strong I was being. If only they knew that my strength came from rage, not resilience. But every spare moment, I was gathering evidence. I found Richard's old computer in the garage, covered in dust. Daniel hired a tech specialist who recovered thousands of deleted files, emails between Richard and our children that were even more damning than the ones in the box. "Mom's asking questions about the lake house," Jennifer had written. "Should we tell her you transferred it to me?" Richard's response: "No, she doesn't review documents anyway. Just keep her distracted with the grandkids." I discovered Richard had been systematically siphoning money from our joint account for years. $500 here, $1,000 there, depositing it into accounts I'd never been told about. The forensic accountant traced every penny, $340,000 total, moved over 8 years. I found a safety deposit box key hidden in a hollowed-out medical textbook in Richard's study. Inside were pieces of expensive jewelry I'd never seen, a Rolex watch, diamond cufflinks, a gold money clip. The receipts were there too, showing he'd spent over $50,000 on these items as rewards for himself. Meanwhile, I'd been wearing the same winter coat for 12 years because I thought we needed to save money. My attorney filed an emergency petition to freeze all estate assets pending investigation, citing evidence of fraud. Jennifer called me that afternoon, her voice panicked. "Mom, what's going on? Our lawyer just called saying the estate is frozen. Did you do something?" I kept my voice confused, helpless. "Oh, honey, I don't understand any of this legal stuff. The lawyer I hired said it was just routine paperwork. Is something wrong?" "Which lawyer?" she demanded. "Patricia Chen, Sarah Bennett recommended her. You remember Sarah, don't you? My friend from college?" The silence told me everything. Jennifer knew exactly who Sarah Bennett was, and she knew her mother had just declared war. But she didn't know the extent of my evidence. Not yet. I'd saved the best revelation for the courtroom, for the moment when they'd have no escape, nowhere to hide from the truth. I smiled as I hung up the phone. Let them panic. Let them wonder what I knew. The uncertainty would eat at them the same way their betrayal had eaten at me. Except I had something they didn't, the truth. And soon, everyone would know it. Then came the day I'd been waiting for, the day I'd been building toward through 6 weeks of careful planning and strategic silence. My attorney called a mandatory estate meeting at her office. requiring both Jennifer and Michael's attendance to discuss some critical discrepancies in the will and asset transfers. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. I dressed carefully that morning, a navy blue suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion, pearl earrings Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary, my hair styled in a neat bun. I wanted to look dignified, put together, nothing like the helpless widow they expected. My children arrived confident, almost cocky. I watched from Patricia's office window as they pulled into the parking lot. Jennifer wore an expensive designer suit I'd never seen before, probably purchased with money that should have been mine. Michael drove a new BMW. They walked toward the building together, their body language relaxed, probably thinking they'd just sign some paperwork and continue with their plan. Jennifer had brought her husband, Tom. Michael had brought his lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who carried a leather briefcase. They expected the family attorney, Mr. Peterson, who'd been Richard's friend and golf buddy for years. They expected a friendly discussion, maybe some minor complications to navigate. Instead, they walked into a conference room where Sarah sat at the head of a long mahogany table, flanked by Daniel Rothstein, the forensic accountant, and a court stenographer whose fingers were poised over her machine. Patricia Chen stood by a projector screen. The walls were lined with boxes, evidence we'd collected over the past 6 weeks. The color drained from Jennifer's face the moment she saw the setup. Michael stopped dead in the doorway, his confident expression crumbling. "What's going on?" Jennifer asked, her voice suddenly small. "Where's Mr. Peterson?" I sat calmly at the opposite end of the table, my hands folded in my lap, wearing the same gentle smile I'd worn for 43 years. But my eyes were different now, harder, knowing. "Please sit down," Sarah said, her voice cold and professional. "We have quite a bit to discuss about your father's estate and the fraudulent transfers that occurred before and after his death." Michael's lawyer immediately shifted into damage control mode, reaching for his briefcase. But it was too late for preparation. We had everything. As Jennifer and Michael reluctantly took their seats, their faces pale with growing panic, I watched them exchange nervous glances. They were realizing, perhaps for the first time, that their sweet, naive mother wasn't who they thought she was. The conference room door closed with a final, definitive click. The stenographer's fingers began moving across her machine. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 weeks. Something I hadn't felt in perhaps 43 years. Power. Sarah opened a folder and pulled out the first document. "Let's begin with the property transfers," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Specifically, the illegal transfer of the Victorian home and Vermont lake house into Jennifer's name without Mrs. Whitmore's knowledge or consent." The reckoning had begun. Sarah laid it all out like a prosecutor presenting a murder case, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. She projected the emails on the screen. Thousands of messages between Richard, Jennifer, and Michael, discussing how to minimize Margaret's claim and protect the family assets from her naivety. Michael tried to interrupt, his voice defensive. "This is all being taken out of context." Sarah cut him off with a look that could freeze water. "We're not done." She showed the illegal property transfers, the hidden bank accounts, the fraudulent life insurance beneficiary changes. Daniel walked through the financial trail. $340,000 siphoned from joint accounts, investments worth $1.2 million transferred without my knowledge or consent, real estate quietly moved into the children's names. Jennifer's face was pale as chalk. Michael couldn't look at me. His lawyer was frantically taking notes, probably calculating how much this disaster was going to cost them. But then Sarah paused, and a small smile crossed her face. "Now," she said slowly, savoring the moment, "let's talk about the real wife." She displayed the final letter Richard had written, dated 1 week before his fatal heart attack. The room went completely silent as she read it aloud. "I've been writing these letters for 20 years, pretending they're to some other woman, some perfect wife who doesn't exist. But tonight, after our anniversary dinner, watching Margaret across the table trying so hard to make conversation while I barely responded, I finally understand the truth. Margaret is my real wife. She always has been. All this time, I've been writing letters to a fantasy while ignoring the real woman who sacrificed everything for me. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. Michael's face went white. Sarah continued reading, her voice steady and clear. I don't know when I became this bitter, ungrateful man who couldn't see the value of unconditional love. Margaret gave me everything: her youth, her dreams, her entire life, and I repaid her with contempt. Tomorrow, I'm calling Jennifer and Michael. I'm telling them to stop this plan immediately, to reverse every transfer. I'm going to spend whatever time I have left begging Margaret's forgiveness and trying to become the husband she deserved all along. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of vindication. The phone records show, Sarah continued, her voice turning ice cold, that Dr. Harper called both of his children the day before he died. Multiple times. Neither of you returned his calls. Jennifer started crying, mascara running down her cheeks. We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Patricia interjected sharply. After his death, you proceeded with the plan anyway, knowing your father had changed his mind. That's not just fraud, that's a deliberate conspiracy to defraud your mother of her rightful inheritance. Michael finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Mom, I'm sorry. You thought I was stupid, I said quietly, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm, steady, nothing like the broken widow they expected. You thought I'd never find out. You stood at your father's funeral, crying on my shoulder, accepting condolences about what a wonderful man he was, all while planning to steal everything from me. The room fell silent except for Jennifer's quiet sobbing. The legal battle took 4 months, but we won everything. Every single fraudulent property transfer was reversed by court order. Every hidden bank account was restored to the estate, with me as the sole legal beneficiary. The judge was scathing in his ruling, calling Jennifer and Michael's actions a despicable betrayal of familial trust and a calculated attempt to defraud a grieving widow. Jennifer and Michael were forced to pay restitution for the attempted fraud, plus my legal fees, which totaled over $85,000. The house, the lake cabin, the investments, the life insurance policies, everything Richard and I had built together over 43 years came back to me. Not because a judge felt sorry for me, but because it was legally, rightfully mine. But more than the money or the properties, what mattered most was that the truth came out publicly. In our small Connecticut town where reputation meant everything, news traveled like wildfire. Everyone who'd attended Richard's funeral, who'd called him a pillar of the community, who'd praised our perfect marriage, now knew the real story. Jennifer quietly resigned from the church board, unable to face the whispers and knowing glances. Michael stopped attending the country club where he and Richard had been members. Their own spouses looked at them differently now, realizing what kind of people they'd married, the kind who could smile at their mother while plotting to destroy her. I sold the Victorian house within 2 months. I couldn't live there anymore, surrounded by ghosts and lies and 43 years of wasted devotion. I bought a beautiful 2-bedroom condo overlooking the harbor, modern, bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the morning sun. It was mine, alone, filled with furniture I chose, decorated in colors I loved. And then I did something I'd dreamed about for decades. I enrolled in classes at the community college to finish my teaching degree. At 68 years old, with gray hair and reading glasses and a lifetime of experience, I sat in classrooms surrounded by students young enough to be my grandchildren. I studied education theory, child psychology, modern teaching methods. My professors were impressed by my dedication. My classmates called me an inspiration. I was finally living for myself. My grandchildren still called me, though Jennifer and Michael discouraged it. I met them for ice cream, took them to movies, listened to their problems, but I also told them the truth, age appropriately, about what their parents had done. Family should build you up, not tear you down, I explained to 14-year-old Emma. Love without respect isn't really love at all. Some understood immediately, others didn't yet, but they would eventually. I started a support group at the community center for older women who'd been financially abused or betrayed by family members. We met every Tuesday evening, the same time I used to play bridge with the church ladies. But instead of gossiping over cards, we shared our stories, helped each other navigate legal systems, and reminded each other that our worth wasn't determined by how much we'd sacrificed or how well we'd served others. The letters from Richard stayed locked in a safe deposit box at the bank. I read them occasionally, not to torture myself, but to remember an important lesson. The truest version of yourself isn't the one you perform for others. It's the one that emerges when you finally stop performing and start living authentically. Some days I felt angry, some days I felt sad, but most days I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: free. As I sit here in my new home, watching the sunset paint the harbor in shades of orange and pink, a cup of chamomile tea beside me and my education textbooks spread across the dining table, I think about that woman who found the letters 8 months ago. She was so broken, so lost, so convinced her life was over at 68 years old. She had no idea it was just beginning. Richard spent 20 years writing letters to his real wife, never understanding that I was real the whole time, more real than he ever allowed himself to be. He was writing to a fantasy, an impossible standard, while I was living in reality, making sacrifices, building a family, creating a life with the materials I had. His mistake wasn't falling out of love with me. His mistake was never really seeing me in the first place, never valuing the woman who gave up everything to support his dreams. And my children's mistake was assuming that kindness equals weakness, that selflessness equals stupidity, that a woman who smiles and bakes cookies and never complains has no backbone. They learned the hard way that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous when provoked. We just choose our moments carefully. Here's what I need you to understand. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself with lipstick on collars or suspicious phone calls. Sometimes it comes wrapped in Sunday dinners and I love yous and years of shared history. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you trusted completely, the ones who knew exactly where to aim the knife because you'd given them the map to your heart. But that betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. To every woman watching this who's ever sacrificed her dreams for her family, who's ever felt invisible in her own life, who's ever wondered if she matters, you do. You matter more than you know. Your worth isn't measured by how much you give up or how small you make yourself to accommodate others. It's measured by your courage to reclaim your life when you finally realize you've been living someone else's. Don't wait until you find letters hidden in a study to start asking questions. Don't wait until betrayal forces you to fight back. Start today. Enroll in that class you've been thinking about. Open a bank account in only your name. Ask to see the financial statements. Demand answers when something feels wrong. And if they call you difficult, selfish, or ungrateful, smile and remember. Those are just words people use when you stop making their lives comfortable at the expense of your own. The moral of my story isn't about revenge, though I won't pretend justice didn't feel sweet. It's about remembering that you can't love someone into seeing your worth. They either see it or they don't. And if they don't, after you've given them every opportunity, that's not a reflection of your value. It's information about their character. Use it wisely. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought back like I did, or would you have walked away quietly? Have you ever discovered a betrayal that shattered everything you thought you knew about your life? How did you rebuild? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you know someone who needs this message, someone who's been making themselves smaller to make others comfortable, someone who's forgotten they deserve respect and not just gratitude. Share this video with them. Tag them. Send them the link. Start a conversation. Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's never too late to stop living for other people's approval and start living for our own peace. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with me through the pain and the anger and the ultimate triumph. Your time matters to me. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more true stories about resilience, justice, and the transformative power of reclaiming your life after betrayal. Until next time, remember this: you are not the supporting character in someone else's story, patiently waiting in the wings while they live their dreams. You're the hero of your own journey, and heroes don't ask for permission to save themselves, they just do it. Now go be your own hero. I believe in you.